Hello, and welcome to episode 32 of the American Experiment podcast. I'm David Zimmer, the Public Safety Policy Fellow with Center of the American Experiment, and today I'm joined by Imran Ali. Welcome, Imran.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, I want to get into eventually this insidious anti-police movement that's taken over our country and our state over the last several years. But because you've become kind of a face of the momentum that's pushing back against that here recently in Minnesota, I'd like to introduce you to our listeners and our followers. And so why don't we get to know a little bit about your history, and then we'll get into some of these recent cases.
Sure. Kind of a unique perspective. When I went to law school, I just knew I wanted to do something that made a difference. And I know that sounds probably pretty cliche, but I went to law school. I came here, not from Minnesota. And right away, my career advisor said, if you really want to get in the courtroom and you want to be an advocate, you got to be a public defender. And so the first thing I did was I applied to be a public defender. I was a law clerk in Hennepin County. And then from there, I spent about 10 years as an assistant public defender, which was, fantastic experience, extremely rewarding. Got to meet some great people and also got to learn the law, which was, really important to me. One of the people that I always went up against was a Hennepin County prosecutor, Pete Orpett. Yep. And we had a lot of cases. He was on the robbery team. And at the time, I was picking up quite a few robbery cases. And so we'd have it out in court and then afterwards smile at each other. And because that's what it is, that's what we do. We're on adverse sides. But at the same time, there's that we're cordial with each other. And he said, hey, if I went out in Washington County as prosecutor, I'd love to have you there. And I was like, me? You want me to be there? And he was like, yeah, you got passion. That's all I want. And so I was there for over 10 years.
Okay. Yeah. What year was that? So Pete Orpett ran for Washington County Attorney, won.
Yep.
And brought you in.
That was 2010 is when he ran, and 2011 is when I started.
Okay. So prior to this anti-police movement that's kind of taken hold, or the narrative that's taken hold, did you ever envision in that role as an assistant Washington County attorney that you would have to face a decision like you faced in 2021? Can you?
No, I didn't think it. I remember, I watched the, everything that unfolded Memorial Day of 2020. I saw, our city burning. I saw a lot of people that I've known over the years. This affected tremendously, not only in the community, but also in law enforcement. And I remember thinking to myself, when the other incident happened in Brooklyn Center, I really feel sorry for that prosecutor that's going to have to make that case. And, 24 hours later, it was me.
So let's talk about that. So to bring everybody up to speed, we were referring to the George Floyd case in 2020 and all of the aftermath and turmoil in our area that followed that case. They were about to prosecute 4 Minneapolis police officers for their involvement in that case. And a Brooklyn Center police officer ended up shooting a man named Dante Wright. Can you remind us about all of the facts of that case and how did you become involved in that?
Sure. From a timing perspective, imagine we have I would say the trial of the century or our generation. This is a trial that I think far exceeded even the trial of OJ because of social media and the exposure. This was an international sensation. And so when that trial was occurring, we had all the hotel rooms booked from everybody from every continent in the United States. So this was, in the country, not in the country, in the world. So we had a lot of people looking at us in Minnesota of what was happening. And as the prosecution rests their case and the defense is going to start, we have this incident that happens with all the media and all the attention here. And that's where out of Brooklyn Center, the 26-year veteran Kim Potter was there was a traffic stop. There was a warrant for Dante Wright's arrest based on a gross misdemeanor weapons charge. They tried to effectuate an arrest. Dante Wright went back in the vehicle, at which point Officer Potter brandished her firearm. She met her taser and shot Dante Wright.
Okay.
And so I remember looking at that case as it was happening, saying, this is going to be...
Feeling sorry for the guy that was going to have to decide whether charges should be brought.
Yeah.
So how did it unfold that the Washington County attorney, not Hennepin County, ended up reviewing that case?
After the incident in Minneapolis involving George Floyd, there was the county attorneys from the Metro met, and they thought that the best thing to do was that if an incident happens, to conflict it to one of the other county attorneys, and Washington County was up on that.
Okay.
And so that's how Washington County, Pete Orpett, was assigned the case from Mike Freeman, and then Pete assigned the case to me.
So it was a prearranged agreement. It wasn't something on the fly that Freeman called Orpett and asked him to...
No, I mean, I think it was a prearranged agreement. I wasn't privy to any of that, but yeah.
Okay. So tell me about your decision-making process in that case.
Well, I knew it was going to be difficult. And, even to this day, when I talk about it, I know there are still people that think on one side that Kim Potter should have been charged with murder. And on the other side, Kim Potter should have been charged with anything. And when I looked at this case, I knew right away, this wasn't a use of force case. This was a case of a mistake. And the reason I knew it was a mistake is because I had saw her reaction afterwards. And I also saw, when you say taser, 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 that's with the training that you intend to utilize an incapacitation device. And so I knew it was a mistake. The next question is whether or not there was any negligence. And so that's that manslaughter in the second degree culpable negligence. So I didn't view it as a traditional use of force case. I viewed it as whether or not Kim Potter was negligent in the death of Dante Wright.
Okay. And so you ultimately decided she was at a degree of second degree manslaughter.
I did.
Okay. So after that decision was made, I understand there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of stress and a lot of second guessing and criticism. How did you handle all that, and what decision did you make in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a difficult time. I think from the process of charging the case, meeting with Mr. Crump, who was the family's attorney, meeting with the family, I knew that the decision, likely they weren't going to be happy with it, because at this time, especially after the Muhammad Noor case, there was a push for police officers to be charged with murder. And anything less than that was not satisfactory. And so I knew that it was going to be, controversial, but ultimately it's the decision that I made.
Yeah. And what led you to then walk away from your career as a prosecutor and a highly respected prosecutor in Washington County?
I just no longer, could do it, because I truly believe that regardless whether it's a police officer or somebody that doesn't have a penny in their pocket and that is indigent and needs services, that everybody should be treated the same way with fairness. And that's truly what I believe. And what I have seen for, I would say, the past 4 or 5 years was that there was an appetite to charge law enforcement at all costs. And that the mob was influencing not only the decisions from the prosecutor to charge the case, but also influencing the decisions of what the leaders, our political leaders, would say. And when you have that, when you have an inserting, whether it's political, whether it's a subjective bias view, we have a broken system. And what it really came down to was I was hoping that I would have some elected officials come out and say, you know what, we probably went too far. And it just didn't happen. And where I saw it, Dave, this was headed, and I truly believe it, is that something bad was going to happen. Somebody was going to get hurt, seriously hurt, or die, whether it's myself, whether it's Pete. There were protests at his house every day. Or one of the protesters could have gotten hurt. And we were at this really pivotal point, and I wanted nothing to do with it, especially when all of that went unchecked.
So while you were making the decision of what charges would be appropriate in the Potter case, your boss, Pete Orpett, was the subject to daily protests by activists demanding that you charge Potter with murder. Was that
Yeah,
kind of
no, it's fair.
the story?
Yeah, I mean, the emails and the voicemails that we got, I can't even tell you. I mean, it was, I never knew a voicemail box could be filled up so quick until you make a controversial decision like that. And we got it all. I mean, we got everything from whether it was a death threat to just pure vitriol. It was a really difficult time. And again, as a prosecutor, I got to make those difficult decisions. And so it's okay for that to happen, but the gravity of what had happened and how we saw this completely escalate from Mike Freeman's house being flooded, day 3 of the protests, all the way now until this case where there was, the activists really were the ones that were driving all of this. And again, unchecked. And a lot of what they were saying was not true, was completely inaccurate. But
you shared with me a comment that Ben Crump said to you. Do you know the comment I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I was actually at Pete's house, and we had a conversation, and it was, it was a difficult time, I think, for both of us. But again, I got to that point where I knew something bad was going to happen. So I did contact Mr. Crump and said, hey, on one hand, you meet me and you shake my hand and say this is the appropriate charge. And by the way, it wasn't just him. It was a slew of other civil rights lawyers that have flown in because they were, remember, this is during the trial of Derek Chauvin. So there's a slew of other attorneys, but him saying that, you got it right. And then 24 hours later to say it was intentional, in a microphone in the city of New York, and then continuing that. And so I had a conversation and said, words matter. And I really think they do. And I think that he's rightfully so has gained quite a following. And there are people that look up to him as a lawyer, as a leader, and somebody who's going to be accurate in what they're going to say. But what he said to me was, look, you seek justice as a prosecutor in the courtroom. My justice is in the streets. And for me, at that point, I just wanted nothing to do with it.
Right. So you walked away from a public career, and how did you end up at Eckberg Lammers, and what is your role there?
Before I got to Eckberg Lammers, kind of a funny story. I hadn't applied for a job in, decades. And so I went to the gas station to get a newspaper to get the classified ads. And when I got home, I realized that classified ads don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So I had to go online. And then when I went online, one of the first jobs that I applied, and it was actually, I was like, I'm going to get out of all this. And it was Foot Locker. Yeah. It was a regional manager position. And I was like, maybe that's where I should be. Maybe I need to get out of this completely. But knowing who I am and knowing that I really want to effectuate change, which is the reason I went to law school, this firm, Eckberg Lammers, out of Stillwater, Bloomington, and Hudson, they do a variety of things, but they also, the way I know them, is they're municipal prosecutors for 26 cities around the state.
Okay.
And so the managing partner and I talked, and he said, what do you think about training law enforcement? And I'd been doing that for years. He said, but what do you think about training law enforcement in a different way? That really piqued my interest. And so I was humbled and blessed to be offered a position at the firm. And right away, we started getting to work and creating content that law enforcement could truly benefit from.
Okay.
And so ever since then, I haven't looked back.
So I see on your shoulder you have
LETAC.
LETAC.
Yeah.
Is that part of the program, the training program?
It is. I wish I could come up with a better story about where that came from, but it was drinking coffee in the morning and saying, what do we call this? Okay. What about law enforcement training and consulting? And it's like, oh, that sounds really neat. LETAC. And so that's kind of how it was created. And now we're, what started out as, just me has turned now into, we have about 7 employees and about a dozen faculty. And not only do we train all over Minnesota, but we train all over the country. So it's been a really neat experience.
And I understand one of the people that you travel around and train with is actually Kim Potter, who you made a decision to charge criminally in the Dante Wright case. Can you explain how that came about and what the course is that you two teach together?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to why I wanted to be a lawyer to begin with was I want to make a difference and a change. And so people had said, you two need to meet. And I was like, well, I'm the one who put her in jail. I don't think that she probably would want to meet me. But there was so much stuff that happened, I think, after I was no longer on the case. And I think that got back to Kim. And once her sentence was over, we had an opportunity to meet. It was an interesting,
I bet.
it'd be a fly on the wall in that conversation. But it was interesting. And then we continued to talk. And you'd expect somebody like her. And she said this, I made a mistake. And it's a big mistake. It costs the life of somebody. You'd expect somebody having gone through all of that, forced to move out of their house, death threats galore, convicted, incarcerated, released. You'd expect somebody like that to say, you know what, I'm just going to live my life now.
Right.
We see that all over the country, especially after Ferguson. Officers that are put in the spotlight that completely go, I mean, they're gone, and you don't see it. And I was surprised when she said, look, if I can save the life of somebody else in the community where this doesn't happen, or if I can help law enforcement in any way, that's what I'm going to do. And to me, I found that unbelievable courage of her. I found that very moving. And so one of the first calls I made was to the Attorney General and said, hey, just so you know, Mr. Ellison, my plan is that I'm going to be presenting with Officer Potter, and here's what we're going to be doing. And he said he supports it 100%.
Great.
Now, a lot of other people don't support it.
Like who?
Well, we had we had a conference in Indianapolis, our Force and Focus conference. And the reason that I created that conference was that we have to be better. Policing has to be better.
Yeah.
And we have to have the best practices, not online training, we really have to learn from experts around the country. And so this was a very forward-thinking, conference, and I expected it to go off with no issues. But once the activists found out that I was involved and that Kim was involved, that turned to a TikTok influencer that had 62 million followers. And then it turned into the Hilton, which was our location in Indianapolis, kicking us out. So we had to scramble really to find a venue. And the irony behind all of this is that while the protesters were outside of our new venue with a loudspeaker and a megaphone, the instructors that were teaching on bias.
Okay.
And how to be better at policing. That's the irony behind it. And rather than asking me and saying, hey, what is it? What's the agenda? What are you all doing? It's assumption, fear, mob tactics, and silence.
Yeah, they want to silence you despite, like you just said, the irony of you're trying to make the profession better and improve the profession, which is their argument. They want better police. And yeah.
If I wanted to be silenced, I'd go to Foot Locker. And I made that decision not to go to Foot Locker. And so I'm going to continue to do what I do. And I know that some of the decisions I make, some people don't like, and they're controversial. But regardless of who it is, I'm going to be their voice for them if I find an injustice occurring.
Yeah. So I'm glad you didn't go to Foot Locker. You're doing a great job training police, but you've also got a role as general counsel with the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. We'll call it MPPOA after this because it's a mouthful. But tell me about that role. It's a new role for MPPOA, is it not?
Yeah, it's a new role. I mean, MPPOA it's the largest police organization in the state. Representing rank and file all over. I believe it's almost up to 11,000 members now. And especially, again, we have these decisions that came post-Ferguson. We call the Ferguson effect. Things have changed the way the association was before and the way it is now. And so we had to adapt. And one of those things coming on board was my experience not only as a defense attorney and understanding not only the concept of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but truly what's, behind it, but also my experience as a prosecutor, and then my role in the Kim Potter. It just made sense for us to kind of form, a bond together. And so I've been working with MPPOA now for a couple years in the role as general counsel.
Okay. Yeah, as more and more peace officers, unfortunately, have been charged with their roles in deadly force incidents, you have kind of, and MPPOA has taken that lead role in advocating for the police. And I find it interesting that, or it may be confusing to the public, you're not actually defending in court these officers. They have defense attorneys. But what is your role as general counsel in working with those defense attorneys?
Sure. I mean, it's really working with the association. So I don't have constant communication. Those are privileged conversations with their lawyers. I'm looking out for the interests of the entire association. And if there's something impactful that's happening somewhere, that's where we will then come on board. So it'd be myself, the executive director, which is Brian Peters, and the president, which is Dave Titus. And we'd meet and we'd talk about those sorts of issues with our board and figure out what our next steps are.
In the history of our state, as I understand it, there had never been a police officer charged with a crime related to their use of deadly force up until about 2016, when a St. Anthony peace officer named Geronimo Yanez was charged with second-degree manslaughter in the shooting death of Philando Castile. Since that case, there have been a total of 8 peace officers since 2016 in the state now charged with some crime, either manslaughter or up through murder, related to their use of deadly force. It seems inconceivable to me that peace officers have become less professional or more abusive in this time of where we've actually increased professionalization and standards. And I'm just curious, what do you think is behind all of this? Is it all politics? Is it a combination of a number of things? What do you think is behind?
That's a really tough question. I think if we, with your experience and my experience, if we looked back even before the Yanez case, 20, 30 years, I think we would see instances looking at it now in 2024 saying that probably wasn't reasonable for the officer to do. So I think there definitely was a change. And I think some of that change is good, that, law enforcement can't use deadly force unless it's reasonable under the law. And that's the longstanding, decision in Graham versus Connor. And so I think we had the Ferguson effect, number one. Remember, we also still have the incident that happened in the 90s with Rodney King. And so this just kind of, with Ferguson, it kind of reignited that, no pun intended. And then it went on to whether it's Jamar Clark, which was out in Minneapolis shortly thereafter, Muhammad Noor, Yanez. There was just, I think, this strong momentum for police accountability. And I am a enormous proponent of police accountability. If there's an officer that does something that's unreasonable or outside the lines of the law, as a prosecutor, I'd have no problem charging that. However, what we have seen post-Ferguson was a disregard of the law, a disregard for policies, and quite frankly, almost disregard for fairness. And all of that kind of played into what we saw happen on Memorial Day on 2020. Looking back on it, we should have saw this coming, especially with the escalation from the Jamar Clark case to the protests that happened on Yanez, the blocking of the freeways, and then ultimately what we got in Minneapolis. Probably should have saw it coming, but that's where we're at. So there's politics, there's race relations, there's history. There's so much that's balled up into that. And we saw it happen at our doorstep.
Yeah. You brought up Jamar Clark, and there was an interesting change in the way the prosecutor, Mike Freeman, handled that decision-making process of deciding whether the officers involved should be charged with a crime. Can you discuss that change and why it's a problem?
Yeah. So at that, but previous to that, if there was an officer-involved shooting case, the prosecutor would take it to a grand jury, and the grand jury would either indict or not indict. After that, or right after Jamar Clark, some of the activists demanded that grand juries no longer be utilized. And at the time, the county attorney of Hennepin County agreed with those activists and made the decision that in Hennepin County, grand juries will no longer be used. But the intended or unintended consequence was the other 86 counties had to follow.
Right.
The largest county saying that grand juries aren't transparent, and that we no longer should use grand juries and it should be up to the decision of a county attorney. Now, all other 86 counties had to follow suit. Now we can see where you could have a prosecutor injecting ideologies and politics into that decision. If you have a prosecutor that's running on a platform of police accountability, you better believe it that they're going to deliver on that the first chance they get.
Right. What do you make of the narrative that grand juries prevent a complete transparency? Isn't there a process that after the decision is made, you can actually make that grand jury information transparent?
Yeah, that's the biggest problem with our law right now, is that if a grand jury results in an indictment, then it's public.
Okay.
If a grand jury results in no indictment or no bill, it's not public.
I see.
And so if I had a message to the Minnesota legislature, it's like, let's get back to grand juries and the people making the decisions. And regardless of whether there's an indictment or not, open up the transcripts.
Okay.
Open up the transcripts to see that the process was fair, that the evidence was brought in, was fairly applied to all sides, and ultimately the grand jury made that decision. But where we're at now, by having a prosecutor solely make that decision, I think we're seeing that the consequence of that unfold in Hennepin County right now.
Right. There's also been a movement to involve the state attorney general's office in the charging decisions or the actual prosecution. What's your feelings on that? And is it a good development in our state?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask. I think personally, there's no doubt about it that I have had my disagreements with our attorney general. Some of those have been pretty strong disagreements that we have. But what I will say is this: anytime I need to run anything by him, he picks up the phone. Yeah. And I can't think of anybody else. I mean, just think about it. The attorney general in a state just picking up a phone call and having a conversation. So that's what sets him apart, I think, from other people of power, that you're not able to truly get in to that. I know that the attorney general, as the prosecutor in the Chauvin case and the other three people, that obviously some of your viewers may look at him and say, I don't believe anything that he says. But I think that if you look at what has been happening the last year and a half, I think what we see is an attorney general really wanting to get a better idea of what's going on, and hoping to make some positive change in law enforcement. We're still going to have disagreements, but the fact that there's an open line of communication and our association can communicate with him, and we see some of those positive changes coming out, that's a win for our members, but it's also, I think, a win for our state.
Can you talk about the concept of a dedicated, both a dedicated investigative group, like the BCA has set up a full-time use of force investigative group now. I'm guessing in other states, there's actually full-time prosecutor units that only deal with use of force cases. And can you talk about the benefits of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I know the BCA, very similar to every other jurisdiction, they have a group. They're called different names, but a state group that runs those investigations. And I think that has proven to be successful, not only here, but all around the country. The difficulty on the prosecution creating essentially a team in the state that prosecutes this case is that where does that team come from and who appoints the leader?
Yeah.
Because once we get into that, then we get into the infusion of politics,
right?
Whether it's right or left. We cannot have that anywhere in the justice system. So I truly still believe it's the county attorney of each jurisdiction, return back to grand juries, have the grand jury make the decision. But I think it should be up to the local county attorneys that are elected in those counties.
So they're answerable to
they're answerable to their constituents that are there and what they elected them on. I think what we're seeing right now in the news with the Trooper case is that what happens if we have a scenario where we have that county attorney and maybe that county attorney is making a very, very poor decision. Are there any checks and balances? That's kind of what we're seeing play out right now.
Right. Maybe we can end with a recap of that case or an update. Where do we sit with the Trooper Ryan Londrigan prosecution? It's gotten a lot of news since it happened back last July, and there have been a lot of controversies that your group has actually brought to light. In terms of, well, I'll let you explain.
Sure. Well, look at it this way. When you hear from MPPOA or you hear from me, we believe there to be an issue. We have use of force cases that happen, I wouldn't say weekly, but I mean, they happen. It's part of the job. Very rarely do you hear me comment on any of those cases, even those cases that are pending potential prosecution. We let that system play out. And so this was a particular case in which we believed without a doubt that this was tragic. Anytime there's a loss of life, it's tragic. It was tragic, but under training, the law and policies, this was reasonable. And it definitely was not, it does not rise to the level to support any criminal charges. And so this was one that we identified. We looked at all the different sides. We consulted with a bunch of subject matter experts. And ultimately, the decision was that we have to defend Trooper Ryan, whether it's in the courtroom. And I think what we have seen a lot in the last few years is what happens in the courtroom is one thing, but when lies continue to spread, those lies then become these truths, even though they're not truths. And they get perpetuated by the media. And we had to stop that. And so we definitely have treated this case differently for a reason. It's because Mr. Londrigan should never have been charged.
What's the back office process for deciding who to reach out to and hire as an attorney? Because the MPPOA actually hires the attorneys to represent officers like Trooper Londrigan.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the MPPOA has a legal defense fund separate from what I do. Somebody completely different that's in charge of that. And so there's a group of criminal defense attorneys. My understanding is they get interviewed, they get vetted, and then they're on a wheel per se.
Okay.
And so then they're assigned the next incident that happens and the next incident that happens. So I'm not involved in the hiring of who those attorneys are. I just know they look for the very best attorneys in our state.
How does the legal defense fund build up its assets?
Well, I mean, the last few years have been really difficult. We just rely on our members. Our members, provide their annual their dues, and it's almost like an insurance. It's like,
sure,
we hope you never have to use it, but if you do, you're going to have some talented lawyers that are going to do whatever they need to do in the courtroom.
But just to be clear, it's the 11,000 peace officers across the state that make monthly dues or annual dues to that legal defense fund, and then should they need it, they can draw on that.
Yeah, it's not like we have a big donor that's coming in and paying for these attorneys. No, it's all the members.
What's the latest with the Londrigan case? Do we have a trial set, and what?
Yeah, we have a trial set. Again, checks and balances are important. We have a judge, we have a prosecutor, we have a defense attorney, and I think what we've seen in this case, or at least I'll give it just my opinion, it seems as if like it's defense minded. I mean, it's just when you hear things that are happening, and I think the most frustrating part is I find out what's happening when I watch the news.
Yeah.
That should never happen. It should never happen when we find out whether it's a use of force expert quitting or whether it's bringing on a different, we should not be finding out on the news that it's happening. And so where we're at right now is we have the head of the criminal unit in the county attorney's office that was hired by the county attorney He no longer is working there. So Mr. Osler, professor at St. Thomas, is the one who signed the complaint. He's gone. The lead prosecutor on the case, at least with the media, Josh Larson, at least with the media's reporting, I have not communicated with him whether it's true or not. He requested to be off the case. I know there are so many talented, experienced prosecutors still in that office. None of them have been assigned the case. And so now you have the county attorney hiring $1 million law firm to come in. And I think take away the fact that it's $1 million, that's a big sticker shock. I think what the viewers really need to be outraged over is the fact that a prosecutor is charging an hourly rate. Yeah, think about that for a minute. At $850 an hour times 5 attorneys, plus their paralegals, what incentive does that firm have to do what's right? If that firm wanted to dismiss the case, or if that firm wanted to offer a deal, why would they when there is such an enormous financial motive? And that's why we do not do prosecution on an hourly rate. You just don't do it. And the fact that this is occurring at the rate of what it is, that's really, really problematic. We found out that the use of force expert, originally Mr. Noble, gave that verbal, decision that, hey, this is reasonable based on this. Well, we don't need you anymore.
Right.
And then now we found out on the news there was another expert that was solicited, and now that person is off. Right. It seems as if this is this ongoing soap opera. And part of the reason it is that when you do things for the right reasons, things are easy. It may be difficult up front, but it's easy. When you do things for the wrong reason, or they're politically motivated, and things don't go right, like it's happening right now, you see chaos. And we have chaos on our hands.
Sure. The MPPOA, I know, and you specifically have petitioned the governor to consider taking that case from Mary Moriarty's office, the Hennepin County Attorney's office, and reassigning it to the Attorney General. That was actually done in a traditional murder case earlier, about a year ago, where the governor made a decision based on an absurd plea agreement that Moriarty's office was making. What reaction have you gotten from the governor's office when you made these pleas or petitions?
Yeah, and that case, the murder of Zahara McKeever in Brooklyn Park, that was a case that, the family came to us, MPPOA.
Did they?
How bizarre.
Yeah.
But they came to us and said, hey, we need some help here. We need intervention. And so myself and Brian Peters, we actually went to the Shiloh Temple over in North Minneapolis, met with the family and met with the community there, and they were outraged. This was a murder. It was a cold-blooded murder. And to see the victim's rights not being even taken consideration, this was an enormous miscarriage of justice. And so we implored the governor at that time to remove the case, and the governor did. The reason I bring that up is it's not a police case, right? Even though they came to us saying, hey, look, we need your help. And on this case, it's a rare occurrence, being a former county attorney, that I would ever try to remove a case out of a county attorney, because ultimately that's what the voters elected there.
Right.
However, if there's an ultimate check and balance, like a veto, if there's an ultimate check and balance, if something is occurring that is so out of the realm of what is reasonable, there has to be some place that we can go to, whether it's the police or whether it's the citizens, and we have the governor, and the governor has that ultimate control. I can tell your viewers this, is that I have been in constant communication with the governor's office for the last several weeks. We have not only privately, but we have publicly have really just implored the governor that this is a case that really needs another eye, some other eyes on it. And my fear, Dave, is that if this remains with the county attorney and it's a guilty verdict, let's say it's a guilty verdict on any of the charges, I don't know if we're going to have police officers in our state. And I also don't believe that we could sit quietly and watch somebody that should never have been charged go to prison. It's going to definitely hurt. It's going to set us back. If it's a not guilty verdict, I fear for our city again.
Right.
And I fear what the reaction is going to be. That's why another prosecutor has to come in, whether it's attorney general or another county attorney, give it their eyes. And if their eyes are the same, right, we're going to have to accept that. And their attorneys are going to have to go in court and battle it out. But we truly believe, our team of legal advisors, when you look at this case without any ideology, out any passion, out any without any politics, you're going to come back to the same conclusion that it's tragic, but it was reasonable under the law.
Okay.
And so we're going to continue to put our pressure on the governor. And I know the governor's made some public comments. I believe the word he used was concerning. And it's been echoed a few times because as we learn this drama that's happening behind the scene, if the top person in the state is concerned, my message to Governor Walz is, if you're concerned and there is somebody that's charged criminally with the case, that concern should be the only decision you have to remove the case. And we really hope that the work that we put into this, we really hope that the governor removes the case from the county attorney, and let's get some fairness back.
Well, thank you for the work that you've been doing with MPPOA as general counsel. And I feel like you have at least started the pendulum swinging back to more middle of the road, and we can get away from this anti-police rhetoric and narrative that's really swept across our state.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time, but thank you for your time this morning, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate being here.